Collisions. Even if you've never made a game before, you probably know and understand that word to a certain degree because every game needs a collision system to make literally anything work. I've set up a little scene here with this red line around my player, and we're going to make something that when we touch those red lines, our scene will get reset. We'll reload the level. Then we'll also end up making a key that in the next video, we're going to make a door that'll check if we have that key so that we can move out of this little room. For now though, if we don't have any code, the collision itself already works. We can't exit out of this because the walls that I've made here, those are these 4 squares, all have a box collider 2D, and my player here also has a box collider 2D and a rigid body. Just putting those components on these objects already makes the collision itself work perfectly. From here, we're just going to add some extra code on top of that. And we're going to do that for the time being in our player movement because our player movement script already exists and it's relatively small, so it can take a little bit more code before it starts becoming unreadable. So Unity comes with a couple of functions that you can use for this, which is fantastic, and those are called onCollisionEnter. You've also got onCollisionStay, onCollisionExit, and you've got a 2D variant for all of those. Of course, we're going to be using the 2D variant for onCollisionEnter. Then, since we're going to be reloading the scene, we need to be using Unity Engine.SceneManagement, otherwise we can't access the loading and unloading of scene. And in here, we're simply going to just use that scene manager.loadScene, and in order to load a scene, we need the scene's name. So the way we get our current scene's name is we use the scene manager dot get active scene, which is a function, dot name. And that's all the code there is to it, because this onCollisionEnter 2D will fire every single time there is a collision 2D event. So whenever we collide with something, this will run. Now, in a real game, things get a little bit more complex because you're probably going to want to check what you've collided with, because you don't want this to run on your character every time you collide with the ground. You only want this to happen when you collide with a bullet or with an enemy or with a whatever. So this is not very useful for a real world purpose, but for a example, I think this will do fine. So now when we run into these walls, we can see the scene reset. Now, time to make a key. So let's add a new sprite. Let's make it a capsule. Why not? Make it a little bit smaller. And let's make it a purple. To this, we're going to add a capsule collider 2D to make it fit the sprite properly. And this one, we're actually going to change into a is trigger. The difference there being we can just go through this. It's still noticing that there's a collision event there, but since it's a trigger and not an actual collider, it will not stop us from going through it. The moment I disable this is trigger, now it's just a normal collider and it works like usual. Of course, the onCollisionEnter 2D is not the only thing. We also have a onTriggerEnter 2D, which does what you might expect it to, namely that being fire every time you get into a trigger collider. For now, we're just going to make this delete the key and change a bool within our own code. So let's make that bool. So bool has key. When we get in a trigger, we first set has key to being true, and then we make a GameObject variable for the key, which is equal to collision.GameObject. Then we simply destroy the key. And now when we enter the trigger, we can see the key got destroyed. And if we go into our player script, we can't see the value for all of our variables. If you come up to the top right corner here, we can change this from normal to debug, which will let us see all of the variables, even the ones that are in public. So let's do that again and keep an eye on the has key variable, because now when we collect a key, you see that becomes true. That's something that we can then use in the next video to make a door that only will let us go through it when we have the key. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see